Hello everybody and welcome to round one of the virtual racing compound Porsche Super Cup. You join myself, Jack Werrell, in the Road Atlanta commentary box to run you through all of the highlights here this evening. We have two races on the way, a 15-minute sprint race, then followed by a 25-minute feature race. So the grid has been formed for the first race of the season. Quick rundown, it's Matthew Forrest on pole position with Pete Plasto alongside. Nicholas Cucato as Timothy van der Broek for company on row 2. Row 3 is made up of Chris Roberts and Gaston Maceroni. Then it's Craig Thompson and Stuart Jacklin. Harry Sherwood, Chris Pio, Cody Steig and Matt Sisler rounds out the first 6 rows. And then we only have one more driver to make up. And it's Stephen Orrell for DIS, racing 2 seconds away from the pole time. A very, very close field. And we've got lots to look forward to ahead of the first race of the season. You can see Matt Forrest sat there waiting patiently on the first row of the grid, waiting for Nicholas Cucato and Matt Sisler to join the grid. And as soon as they have arrived, we will be able to get the 15-minute sprint race underway. So there we go. The final drivers take to the grid. We will wait for the lights to appear, which they do in a few moments' time. Revs rise. And the first round of the virtual racing compound Porsche Super Cup here at Road Atlanta is away. Everybody bogs down in the background. It looks like an okay start from Matt Forrest, but he immediately gets dropped back. So Pete Plasto manages to work his way into the lead, followed by Timothy van der Broek. Nicholas Cucato in second place. There's contact in the background. There's lots of contact. 2, 3 cars heading off in towards the gravel trap, and yet more contact in the background. It's all gone off. It's all gone wrong in the background. Pete Plasto still in the lead. Chris Roberts sat there in third place. Matthew Forrest, after dropping down to about 6th or 7th place after the contact in front of him, he remains in third now. Harry Sherwood sat there in fourth, followed then by Cody Steig, Matt Sisler and Chris Pio. So Apex Tech doing what they can to pick up a few places from the demise of others. Stephen Orrell up from 13th to 8th, 5 places gained from where he started. Timothy van der Broek dropping back after what was a brilliant start, immediately thrusted himself in towards the top 3, right the way down in 9th place. Stuart Jacklin rounds out the top 10 with a lot of damage on the front of that car. Then we get back to Craig Thompson with a rather second-hand looking Porsche 992 Cup car. And it's Nicholas Cucato after he had a great start. He was really challenging for the lead in towards turn 1, whether he made contact with another driver or hit the grass and then got caught up in the incident as well. Gaston Maceroni has returned straight to the pit lane, but at the moment it's Pete Plasto leading the way. It's been a dream start from him, so VRC 1, 2, 3 as we go on to the second lap of the first race of the season, the first race of the evening as well, of course. But Pete Plasto already doing what he can to extend that lead over his VRC teammate Chris Roberts in the background. 2.7 seconds, first lap completed, a 1 minute 24.272. So from a standing start to only be 2 seconds off what was the pole time here at Road Atlanta, it is a great, great start from Pete Plasto. Then we get back to Chris Roberts and Matthew Forrest trying to make up from what was quite an exciting start here at Road Atlanta. So we have yet more drivers returning to the pit lane. Stuart Jacklin, Craig Thompson and still Gaston Maceroni in the pit lane. We are looking at a great battle here. There is Stephen Orrell doing what he can to mount as much pressure on the Apex Tech car of Chris Pio. He has a little look to the inside, decides to bleed out on the brakes. Through the right hander we go. A little bit of grass. You've got to be careful in these cars not to touch that grass, because with slick tyres and no driving aids of any sort, you can very quickly go from bad to worse. But the cars still looking sterling with their liveries up and down the order. But Stephen Orrell up 5 places, trying to make it 6. He's in the draft range well and truly, tucked underneath the rear wing. On the brakes, can he do anything about it? He's a long way back, around about a quarter of a second. He still remains behind the Apex Tech car, but that's a very late lunge, locks up on the brakes. I think potentially caught out by the access speed he has because of the draft assistance he was getting from the car in front. VRC drivers trading fastest lap of the session. Matt Forrest with a 1 minute 20.833. And it has already got past Chris Roberts, so Matthew Forrest back into second place now. He's got 3 seconds to make up to the other VRC driver of Pete Plasto, still leading the way. But in the background we do have more battles shaping up. So Chris Pio sat there in 7th place, no longer with the attentions of Stephen Orrell behind. His Apex Tech teammate of Matt Sisler sat there in 6th place. Cody Steig breaking the pattern, and then we get back to another Apex Tech car of Harry Sherwood, currently sat there in 4th place. Pete Plasto is still leading the way, however. 3 minutes of the 15-minute race gone. Lap 3 of the race we are currently on at the moment. 2.7 seconds is the lead margin between Pete Plasto and Matthew Forrest. Chris Roberts just sat in the final few wisps of draft, so VRC working together here to really bring it to their competitors. But at the moment, VRC 1, 2, 3. So approaching the halfway point in the first race of the season. The lead gap has remained the same still, 2.7 seconds separating Pete Plasto and Matt Forrest. There is Matt just over the crest, he appears now. Chris Roberts still chomping at the bit in third place. Everybody has returned to the circuit. Gaston Messeroni back in the mix. 4 seconds, best part of 5 seconds up the road is Stuart Jacklin. Now with a rather refreshed looking Porsche 992. Craig Thompson just sat behind as well, attempting to put a lap over on Stuart Jacklin. We do have a battle slightly further up the order. It's between the two Apex Tech cars, Ari Sherwood followed by Matt Sisler, presumably working together in the background. You can also see Chris Pio as well, just trying to keep touch with his two teammates up the road. There's not too much to pick between them at the moment. Heading onto the back straight, are we going to see a potential overtake between the teammates, or are they going to work together to do what they can and take the 1 second margin away from Cody Steig? There is Cody, not too far up the road. There is definitely potential for teamwork to try and reel in Cody. Down the hill we go before jumping on the brakes. It's a big look up the inside from Matt Sisler. Is he going to do it on the brakes? Almost side by side. There we go. Position made. Grabs the apex. But then you can see Ari Sherwood opened the corner up to try and maximise his exit. So down the hill we plunge, heading towards the final corner. Got to be so careful not to run wide onto that grass. Even more so at this speed. Crossing the line now. Both drivers still nose to tail. But Matt Sisler up 7 places from where he started. Now in 5th place. Good stuff from Matt. The second Matt currently sat there in 2nd place. Matt Forrest under pressure very slightly from his VRC teammate Chris Roberts. I'm sure they are talking to each other and they are in contact, just letting each other know the score and whether they are going to try and push for an overtake or try and take some time out of Pete Plasto in the lead. They have successfully taken half a second away since, 2 laps ago. But Pete Plasto still a dominating lead, 2.5 seconds. So good stuff from Pete in the number 312 VRC machine. But Chris Roberts only half a second away from Matt Forrest, heading down the back straight now. He won't be close enough this time by, whilst he is in the draft, and he will be picking up a few extra kilometres an hour. On the brakes, you've got to be so committed, and Matt Forrest is very, very confident on the brakes indeed. So as the noses of cars both dive down as they make the most of their very high braking performance in these Porsche 992 Cup cars. Under the Fox Racing Bridge we go. It still remains the same. Pete Plasto leading the race, followed by Matthew Forrest, Chris Roberts, Cody Steig and Matt Sisler rounds out your top 5 at the halfway point in the first race of the season. So back towards the mid-pack. We are seeing the mid-pack really open up, and it's a lock-up and a run wide there from Chris Pio. That allows Timothy van der Broek to work his way through. The two Apex cars up the road really starting to mount pressure on Cody Steig as well, but at the moment Timothy van der Broek making up for the lost positions at the early part of the race. Chris Pio just sat behind now in 8th, and it's Stephen Orrell about a second back in 9th place. So it's a trio here and a trio just slightly further up the road as well. So it's still Cody Steig sat there in 4th place, Matt Sisler in 5th, and it's Ari Sherwood in 6th place. Back to this battle, however, it's nose to tail through the final corner. Cody Steig still remaining in front, both cars bouncing over the curbs on the run up towards turn 1. Are we going to see a positional change? Not quite yet. 2 tenths separating the pair of them. On the brakes they go. Open up corner entry, try and carry as much momentum up the hill as possible. Really nose to tail stuff as we head onto lap 9 of the race. Over the curb both of them go. In the background it's hotting up once again. Chris Pio and Steve Orrell nose to tail. Steve Orrell trying to yet further improve upon his position, starting on the back row of the grid, right the way down row 7 into 13th place. He's gained 4 places, currently in P9 overall, trying to make that P8 as Chris Pio slowly losing a bit of pace towards the latter stages of this race. Up the road, we've still got this battle going on. Cody Steig and Matt Sisler nose to tail. Larry Sherwood really being the rear gunner at this point. So Matt Sisler can just focus forward, not worry about what's going on behind him, and just try and get that position made, because he does have his Apex Tech teammate there to defend from Timothy van der Broek if it gets to that point. We all know that battling cars are slightly slower than one solo car, and at the moment Timothy van der Broek really making the most of that. In the background once again, Steve Orrell in the draft underneath the rear wing of Chris Pio, jinks out towards the left-hand side of the circuit. Down the hill we go. Will he get the move secured on the brakes? Both of them side by side, and it looks like Stephen Orrell is going to get the car in towards the apex first. Yes, he is. On to the final lap of the race we go now. Stephen Orrell up into 8th place. Chris Pio down into 9th. Further up the road, we've still got this battle going on. Nose to tail, crossing the line. Lap 10 of the race we are on now. Cody Steig doing what he can to hold on to 4th place. Matt Sisseler just sat behind in 5th. He doesn't really have to worry about Harry Sherwood behind, like we say, because they are both Apex Tech drivers. Very wide on the entry there by Cody Steig, but he does make it work. Does he run wide? Yes, he does. All over the grass, all over the escape road he goes, and Matt Sisseler does manage to get through. So too does Harry Sherwood and Timothy van der Broek. So he's gone from 4th right the way down into 7th place. One little mistake. It may potentially even be 8th, because Stephen Orrell is on an absolute mission, trying to work his way up through the order, and it looks like he's got a better run on the exit there. So heading up towards the double right-hander, we'll have to keep an eye on the leaders to make sure we can catch them crossing the line. But Stephen Orrell, 8th place at the moment, trying to make that 7th. Up the road we can still see the Apex Tech cars nose to tail. Matt Sisseler leading Harry Sherwood. Timothy van der Broek not too far back, however. But heading through the final couple of corners for the final time, it is Peter Plastow to take a dominating victory. Managed to work his way through the first corner very, very quickly. Avoided the incident. I think he's got fuel surge. Pete Plastow, is he going to get the win? Yes, he is. Just about 0.3 of a second separating himself and Matt Forrest after running low on fuel towards the latter stage of the race. And it's Matt Forrest and Chris Roberts giving each other a love tap at the end of the race. And it's Matt Sisseler who will cross the line in 4th place. Who will it be in the background? It's Timothy van der Broek that does manage to make it work. Matt Sisseler 4th. Timothy van der Broek manages to get 5th place on the final lap of the race. Then it's Harry Sherwood finishing 6th. Cody Steig in 7th, and Stephen Orrell manages to make up the top 8. So you can see now the drivers readying up and taking to the grid. Chris Pio sat there on the front row. He will be starting in 2nd place. Race 1 winner Peter Plastow will start right the way down in 10th position. Only just managing to take the win in race 1 after fuel shortages towards the very latter stages of the final lap. Coming under the Fox Racing Bridge for the final time, he got some fuel surge, managed to make it to the line, only 0.3 clear of his virtual racing compound teammate. So we only have a few more drivers to take to the grid. Our pole sitter, Nicholas Cucato, sat there awaiting the lights to show up. All we now have to wait for is Matt Sisseler. The final Apex Tech car will very shortly take to the grid, and we will be able to get the 2nd race of the evening, the 2nd race of the season underway. So revs rise, lights will very shortly be coming on, and the 2nd race of the season, the first feature race of this season here at Road Atlanta is away. Not a great start from our pole sitter. It's a good start from Stephen Orrell. He manages to get away well, 3-4 wide in the background. Peter Plastow takes to the grass, trying to work his way past his teammate, but at the moment it's still Nicholas Cucato working his way through. Then it's Stephen Orrell, Chris Pio running slightly wide. That's allowed Cody Steig to work his way up the inside into 3rd place. They're still side by side. He manages to make it work, and now it's Timothy van der Broek managing to work his way through as well. So Chris Pio down from the front row of the grid all the way down into 5th place. Matt Sisseler losing a few positions there. Chris Roberts managed to make it work all the way around the outside, or has he? All over the grass he goes. Very careful to rejoin before the left-hander. All the curb on the inside is used, and it's almost 3 wide in the background. Potentially only 1 position lost there, but you can now see Gaston Messeroni looking to work his way through and up the order. Pete Plastow left with very little room, trying to work his way past, but it's absolute car park in front. It's still Nicholas Cucato leading the way, followed by Stephen Orrell, Cody Steig, and it's Timothy van der Broek, Chris Pio right the way down from the first row of the grid. Matt Forrest up into 6th place now, gained 3 places from where he started. Then it's Harry Sherwood and Chris Roberts. Gaston Messeroni tucked underneath his rear wing. It's 3 wide as we head down towards the chicane for the first time. Pete Plastow jumps right the way over to the middle of the road to try and make it work. Craig Roberts has dropped right the way back, so potentially an early issue for himself. But Pete Plastow now up into 8th place. We've got big contact in the background and even further contact up the road. I think Harry Sherwood has been caught up in that. Yes, he has. Unsighted over the crest we go, under the bridge. And I think all of the drivers have managed to work their way through. Any further drivers potentially. So here is Stuart Jacklin, potentially recovering from an earlier issue. Comes over the crest now, and he's not able to avoid any further contact. So big contact again in this race. That's 4 or 5 cars all working their way in towards the pit lane to take some repairs, but it's still all go up at the head of affairs. Nicholas Cucato trying to extend his lead, now 3/4 of a second clear of Stephen Orrell. Matt Forrest right the way up into 3rd place now. He managed to work his way through all of that incident, and that's really spread the field apart. You can see Chris Roberts, Timothy van der Broek, Stuart Jacklin, Harry Sherwood and Cody Steiger all in the pit lane. Chris Pio, not a great start from himself. You can see he has damage on that Apex Tech car, just trying to limp it round, hoping for the next 25 minutes he can potentially improve upon some sort of position. And of course all of the returning drivers, as soon as they leave the pit lane, which I think they have all done now, Harry Sherwood retaking to the circuit with a much fresher looking Porsche 992 Cup car. Everybody does have a fast repair available to them. Chris Roberts returning from the pit lane now in 11th place. You can see Stuart Jacklin now in 10th. The closest cars we have on circuit are almost for the lead, actually. Not a great run through the final sector for Nicholas Cacato. That has allowed Stephen Orrell for DIS Racing to manage to close that gap through the final corner. Through the final corner we go, on to now the third lap of the race. Everybody's trading fastest lap time, but as expected, Matthew Forrester 121.095. That's half a second quicker than anybody else has gone on the first lap of the race. Pete Plasto in hot pursuit, trying to make inroads on his VRC teammate. However, we did see the pace differentiation between the two VRC drivers. It looks like Matt has just got the edge around here, but we could potentially take into hand tyre management. 25-minute race, 10 minutes longer than the first race of the evening, so tyre management might slowly start to play a part in the closing stages of the race. But in the background now, Chris Roberts still trying to get past Stuart Jacklin. Under the Fox Racing Bridge we go, downhill in towards the final corner, and Chris Roberts still sat, chomping at the bit, hanging onto the coattails of the car in front, runs very wide through the final corner. That will pick up an incident point. But continues on, manages to keep the car pointing the same way. Timothy van der Broek has managed to clear the car returning to the circuit. We'll try and figure out who that was. It was Chris Pio after picking up his fast repair. Down into 11th place now, but the lead battle still, 4/10 apart, really closing up on the brakes. Stephen Orrell using all of the curb on the inside and on the outside. All this battling is allowing Matthew Forrest to get within a second of our race leader now. Through the final corner we go once again, bouncing over the curb underneath the bridge, and a 1 minute 20.461, a very quick lap time, 2/10 quicker than Pete Plasto behind. So Matthew Forrest really on a mission, trying to better his already brilliant position. Currently sat on a provisional podium. You can see Pete Plasto bouncing over the curb, over the crest he comes. A little bit of damage on Matt's car, so hopefully that isn't too performance impacting. But he is really reeling in Stephen Orrell now. Through the left-hander we go, all of the curb on the exit being used. We did say at the start of the evening that the real choosing point between these drivers is going to be who can use the most circuit. A late lunge up the inside, a lock up on the inside from Matt Forrest. He manages to get it slowed down. No contact between the pair of them. Very clever driving from Stephen Orrell. He saw that Matt was going to run wide, and I think Stephen Orrell has managed to find the wall. Yes, he has a flick of oversteer on the exit and in towards the concrete barrier, so that's Matthew Forrest up into second place after a very committed move. And now Pete Plasto picking off Stephen Orrell after that incident on the exit, so everybody has shifted up one place. Stephen Orrell returned to the pit lane. He will be able to pick up a fast repair because he hasn't used it so far, but it's still Nicholas Cacato leading the way. 1.4 seconds clear of Matt Forrest now. Chris Roberts all over the coattails of Stuart Jacklin, nose to tail. We saw this battle develop over the few laps prior, and once again, much like his VRC teammate Matt Forrest, he lunges up the inside, manages to get it slowed down, a flick of oversteer, a big lock up, manages to keep the car pointing the right way, gets elbowed onto the grass. Stuart Jacklin left with very little to do there. He gave Chris the room on the inside, and then of course Chris breaking traction at the tail end of that car. Very easily done in these Porsche 992s, but very well held indeed. And now the field can slowly start to settle down. Chris Pio just sat behind Chris Roberts, 6/10 separating the pair of them as we stand, but for the first time in 6 minutes the field is slowly starting to separate. Now we're seeing Chris Roberts has managed to recover from that earlier hiccup, now back underneath the rear wing of Stuart Jacklin. The lead battle's getting closer once again. What can Chris do on the run up towards turn 1? He keeps it on the road this time. Has a little look to the inside, not too much going the way of space, however, so he decides just to hang fire for the moment. Up the hill we go. And then jumping on the brakes before the very quick right-hander. Use a little bit of curb on the inside of what you can get away with. Up onto two wheels there went Chris Roberts. Potentially picked up a slowdown by the looks of that. He's dropped back again. The lead gap has come down to within half a second. So Matthew Forrest really starting to turn up the pressure. Has a big look to the inside. Is he going to make it work? Too wide through the final corner. Isn't going to work. He does tuck back into the draft. That's slightly compromised his exit, but on the run up towards turn 1 once again, Matt Forrest really making his intentions known. A lunge up the inside. Great move from Matt Forrest. So Matt now into the lead. Although Nicholas Cacato has now been gifted all of that draft assistance. Chris Robert, this second of the VRC drivers, now alongside Stuart Jacklin. So on the run up towards the chicane, side by side once again. Will Chris manage to make it work? He's got the inside for the right-hand kink, but the inside will be gifted to Stuart Jacklin on the brakes. Who's going to be last of the late breakers? It looks like Stuart Jacklin. He jumps towards the apex with a big lockup, manages to get it slowed down. And Chris Roberts up into 8th place, position secured. Stuart Jacklin in the background. Can't really do much of the way of defending that. He's now got to go back on the attack and make sure he doesn't lose too much time to Chris Pio behind. Gaston Messeroni has returned to the pit lane. And by the looks of it, Matthew Forrest is slowly extending that lead margin down the straight. Of course, the time will come down. As we previously mentioned, Nicholas Cacato will have all of that draft assistance on the run down towards the chicane. On the brakes, Matt has always been very good in these cars. As long as you minimise the lockups, you will make it work. And no lockups to be noted through the chicane. And still half a second separating them. But by the looks of the previous lap times, Matt Forrest will have the edge over his competitor and will slowly start to extend that lead margin. Pete Plastow 5 seconds away from Nicholas Cacato, but however still on the podium. Craig Thompson in a brilliant 4th place in the VRC green car. So if Craig continues this good run, he should be able to remain in 4th place. The only driver of note for him will really be Matt Sisseler, 2 seconds back in the Apex Tech machine. Chris Roberts still under a minute bit of pressure from Stuart Jacklin, but I think that position is slowly going to fall away from him as Chris Pio is really piling the pressure on the privateer in his rearview mirror. But now Gaston Messeroni goes defensive in towards the chicane. Chris making his intentions known as well, just trying to work his way into what will now be 7th place. So after making a position on the lap prior, he's trying to do the same on the run up towards turn 1. Can he follow Matt's move just a few laps ago? Has a look to the inside, make sure that Gaston Messeroni takes the defensive line. It will compromise his entry and that will vastly compromise his exit. You can see Chris looking towards the outside. That's Gaston Messeroni with brilliant defensive driving, placing the car in the middle of the road, driving a very, very wide Porsche 992. Down the hill we plunge. Bouncing over the curbs, the pair of them go, but Chris Roberts really piling on the pressure, turning up the taps, bouncing over the curbs, the pair of them go. Gaston Messeroni running slightly wider of the two on the run up towards the double right-hander. It looks like Gaston has managed to extend that margin just a little bit, got a bit of breathing room at the most important part of the circuit, because heading on to this back straight, the draft assistance will be very, very vast as we head in towards the chicane, but it looks like 0.6 of a second separates the pair of them, so Chris will be too far back on this lap, but in a few laps' time, who knows, Chris could be on for another positional gain. This time heading on to the back straight. On the 10th lap of the race in the background, Stuart Jacklin very sideways. Chris Pio manages to work his way by. Harry Sherwood, I think, will be a little too far adrift to make any inroads on that mistake from Stuart, but now Chris Roberts all over the coattails, looking to the inside, looking to the outside. Gaston Messeroni being very defensive, as we've already seen. Great move by Chris Roberts, so late on the brakes. Is he going to get it slowed down? No, he isn't. He cuts across the grass, cuts across the gravel, manages to rejoin as safely as possible. They're very, very big lockups that will have overheated his tyres, and he's lost stacks of time to Gaston in front. 2 seconds the gap now. It's gone up from 0.2. It's gone up from 0.2 all the way up to 2 seconds now. So Chris Roberts will be kicking himself about that mistake. So halfway through the race now, just over, and he's got all that work to do again. All the work he put in to try and put that pressure on has all come undone. Matt Forrest not pulling away as much as we'd expect. Still only about a second between himself and Nicholas Cacato in the Virtua Racing number 2 machine. Matt crosses the line now, still lapping very consistently in the 120s. Fastest car out on circuit as it stands. And the field has slowly started to settle down. However, we are seeing Matt Sisseler slowly chip away at 4th place. Craig Thompson, we said he's got to keep this good form to have a dying chance of remaining in 4th place. But whilst he is setting personal best lap times, that's still not quicker than Matt Sisseler. So Matt in the Apex Tech car, really reeling in the VRC green machine. We're now seeing Craig Thompson still under ever-increasing pressure from Matt Sisseler. So while one Virtual Racing compound car is under pressure of going backwards, Chris Roberts is slowly pulling away from Gaston Messeroni. However, he is within touching distance after getting back past the Argentine driver on the brakes in towards the chicane. He does get it slowed down this time through after trying to get that position made a few laps ago, outbraking himself all over the grass, all over the gravel he went. However, this time through, he does manage to get that position made, and he's now got to focus forward, forget about his rearview mirror, and just really start to turn these laps towards the latter stages of the race. Less than 10 minutes to go now on lap 13 of the race. Matt Forrest well safe at the top end of affairs, 2.2 seconds clear now. So exiting Sector 1, heading in towards Sector 2, Chris Roberts still extending that margin. Gaston Messeroni with damage aboard that car, but Craig Thompson now going down the back straight. Matt Sisseler gets ushered towards what will be the outside for the chicane. But Craig Thompson, has he given him a little bit too much room on the brakes? What does he do? Nice and early on the brakes, nice and conservative, no need to waste any time. And Matt Sisseler up into 4th place. Craig Thompson still in a very, very respectable 5th place. And now it seems the field has really started to level itself out. Over the curb we go. And Matt Sisseler, whilst he isn't setting the world on fire in regards to lap times, he is pulling away from Craig Thompson already, having only just made that position. So the American behind the wheel of the number 93 Apex Tech Porsche 992 Cup car, somewhat safe in 4th position already. However, Chris Roberts still under pressure from Gaston Messeroni. A big lock-up from the Argentinian in the background. Under the Fox Racing Bridge we go, in towards the final couple of corners. And that gap is slowly extending, half a second between the pair of them now. Chris using all of the circuit on the entry. You can see a little bit of grass kicked up from the tail end of that car, crossing the line to go on to lap number 14 of the race. And Chris Roberts currently in 7th place. The next car up the road, Timothy van der Broek for Stage 1 racing. 3.9 seconds is the gap between the pair of them. And I can't really see him gaining that much time in the final third of this race. If he can do it, he needs to start lapping very consistently in the 120s, much like our leader, Matt Forrest. However, we are heading on to what will be the final lap of the race. Of course, 25 minutes or 15 laps, whichever comes first. So Matt Forrest on towards the final lap of the race now. Craig Thompson doing what he can to stick with Matt Sisseler. All it takes is a forced error if he just sits in that rearview mirror and maybe the occasional headlight flash. That's all it takes for Matt Sisseler to take his eyes off the road, and a mistake can very, very quickly arise. But Gaston Messeroni still sat in the draft of Chris Roberts. Half a second the gap between the pair of them. Stuart Jacklin and Cody Steig slowly getting closer together as well. And as per race 1, the final few laps of race 2 are really, really starting to bring the field together. That's the mistake we were somewhat expecting from Timothy van der Broek. Of course, he had a fairly sedate race, nothing really of note. And seeing the cars in the background get closer, it can just take a little thing like that to make a mistake. So Timothy now only 6/10 away from Chris Roberts on the final lap of the race. Could we see Chris thrust his way in towards the top 6? There is the battle between Stuart Jacklin and Cody Steig. So down the back straight we go, in towards the final couple of corners. And Cody just sits behind, but for the second time this evening, Virtual Racing Compound will take to the top step of the podium. This time it's Matthew Forrest, so the number 78 machine crosses the line to take the win here in the feature race at round 1 of the Virtual Racing Compound Porsche Super Cup. Nicholas Cucato on reverse grid pole crosses the line to finish second, and Peter Blasto will round out your podium here at Road Atlanta for the second time this evening. Matt Sisseler does manage to fend off Craig Thompson on the run towards the line. So Matt Sisseler will finish in 4th place, very shortly followed by Craig Thompson in 5th. This race is far from over, however, because we now have Timothy van der Broek under very, very intense pressure from Chris Roberts. Down towards the final chicane we go for the final time here at round 1. A big look up the inside from Chris Roberts. Is he going to get the car slowed down? Yes, he is. He grabs the apex, throws it in towards the right-hander, and now it's the short run to the line. Who gets the best run? Chris on the outside. He's tried to force the mistake all over the grass. He goes. A big wobble from Timothy van der Broek sideways in towards the final corner. And who manages to get it? It's Gaston Messeroni gets 6th place. Chris Roberts in 7th. And so unfortunate, but Timothy van der Broek crosses the line in 8th place. We said the race was far from over. And on the final corner of the final lap, Timothy van der Broek with a little bit of a wobble, potentially contact between himself and Chris Roberts, loses 2 places in the space of 1 corner, crosses the line in 8th place. Chris Pio in 9th, and Ari Sherwood rounds out your top 10. We will have the results from the feature race of the evening very shortly up on screen. So the results from the feature race are as follows. Matthew Forrest takes a dominating win, finishing 4 seconds ahead of Nicholas Cucato in second place, and Peter Plasto rounds out your podium. So Virtual Racing Compound, somewhat of a clean sweep, a very, very competitive evening for themselves. Matt Sisseler finishes in 4th place, followed by Craig Thompson. Then we get back to Gaston Maceroni in 6th, Chris Pio in 7th, Harry Sherwood in 8th, Chris Roberts in 9th, and Timothy van der Broek finishes in 10th place. Potentially a few penalties have been applied there. Then we get back to Stuart Jacklin in 11th, Cody Steig in 12th, and Stephen Orrell rounds out your 13 finishes, albeit 12 laps down. So that brings an end to the first round of the Virtual Racing Compound Porsche Super Cup here at Road Atlanta. And it was well and truly action-packed. We head to Sebring in just 2 weeks' time, so we will have yet more highlights coming to you from there. But from myself, Jack Werrell, this has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you at Sebring.